They'll put it down to the 24. This will be a 34-yard attempt. He missed one in the first half from 43 yards out. He's almost right in the center of the field. Cooper gets his kick away. I don't know. It's still going. It's wide to the left. Now listen to this crowd. 15,000 crowds blowing their approval here tonight. Huh? You might find some people who want to write this team off and kiss this team goodbye, but you won't find it at Memorial Stadium here tonight. They're standing and cheering right now as the Hornets dig in and do it again.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hiya, how's it going? My name's Tim Hanlon, your host for this episode of our curious little podcast journey into what used to be in professional sports. We call it Good Seats Still Available. Thanks for coming by. Thanks again for finding us, telling your friends about us. We love hearing from our listeners, and we appreciate you giving us a spin for yet another week of fun-filled excitement in our little journeys together. This week, it's back to football. I know there are a ton of you out there who enjoy and regale in the past histories of the professional football game. And there's no better person to have a conversation with about the history of professional football in this country than our guest this week. His name is Upton Bell, and a very intriguing person in the history of the sport. He was literally, like his book that we're going to be talking about, his autobiography, present at the creation. Yes, he was present at the creation of the NFL, and we'll talk about that, as he was the son of the second commissioner of the National Football League. His name was Bert Bell. He was the commissioner from 1946 until 1959. And as you've heard in a number of previous episodes here on this little podcast, you know the crazy and tumultuous and not guaranteed success and choppiness, I guess, of the National Football League. Lots of ragtag stories and challenges to a rough and tumble sport that was not sort of a straight line. Let's put it that way. And Bert Bell was really the commissioner that solidified and gelled what was quite an array of professional football doings in this country. Not all of them well-financed, not all of them well-run, and a whole lot of stuff. And somebody who was there literally growing up in the midst of all of that was Upton Bell. He, the son of Bert Bell, and his mother, a famous Broadway actress by the name of Frances Upton. And what a unique life as a kid, but tragically lost his dad, if you can believe it, during the playing of an NFL football game, literally in the stands. And, not only tragedy, but something that I guess just transcends that tragic event. It kind of almost sealed in many respects Upton's, I guess, almost destiny to sort of be a football guy, right? Having grown up and literally been around the players of the old NFL as his dad sort of, put all this stuff together and sort of laid the foundation for later years with Pete Rozelle and others afterwards. And we know what the monstrosity that is the NFL today. And it's almost unrecognizable based on what you compare it to from what Bert Bell sort of inherited and brought along over the late 40s and the bulk of the 1950s. But Upton Bell, as a kid, certainly absorbed all of that and, certainly found his way as he became an adult into the football world. And there are a couple of different stops in our conversation that you will hear that are especially fascinating to our little genre here of forgotten teams and leagues. And the first place that he had his real first professional job was the Baltimore Colts, a team of amazing success in the 60s, which led to the New England Patriots, the former Boston Patriots, as they were coming out of the AFL, into the NFL. And Upton Bell was in the throes of management of that team, and arguably set the tone for taking the team, which had its sort of ups and downs, and solidifying it to arguably some of the seeds of what it's become today, as almost if you can call it that, a dynasty. But interestingly as well, we talk about the Colts, of course, the Patriots not so much because, they're still around. So that's a genre for other podcasts to explore. But when Upton left the New England Patriots, he knew that he needed to stay in football, and perhaps it wasn't going to be in the NFL immediately after his departure from the Patriots. But what was happening around that time? And students of our podcast will certainly know that circa 1974, 1975, there was this thing called the, wait for it, World Football League. And Upton Bell was a very important part of the history of that crazy and wacky league. And if you remember any semblance of the New York Stars at the old Downing Stadium on Randall's Island in New York, if you remember the one game that the Stars played when they were announced to move to Charlotte in the middle of the season in 1974, that one game being played in Chicago, where they were officially known as the Charlotte Stars. Or if you remember them in Charlotte for the rest of the 1974 season of the WFL, or the bulk of all of the, say all because it wasn't really a full season in 1975 of the World Football League, the Charlotte Hornets, Upton Bell was the guy behind that franchise. And it's very interesting stuff. You could make the argument, as Bell does in our chat, and it's very easy to see that the market that is now known by the Carolina Panthers in the NFL, obviously for sale. We think it's past a $2.5 billion mark. We'll see where it goes for. Upton Bell largely was responsible for, shall we say, tilling the soil of that market, the Charlotte, North Carolina market, in the earliest days in the 70s for its readiness for pro football. He knew that there was an appetite for it, and that was, frankly, his condition if he was ever going to get into the WFL, is to either launch a franchise or relocate one to that market. And years later, he's been proven more than right, as we see just an astronomical amount going now for the bidding for the Carolina Panthers franchise. So much stuff to get to with our very fun and interesting conversation with Upton Bell. He, the author of Present at the Creation, My Life in the NFL and the Rise of America's Game, coming up in a couple of seconds. So an interesting promotion. So aside from going to our friends at sportshistorycollectibles.com, where you can use the promo code GOODSEATS to get 15% off your purchases. That's where you're going to find all kinds of fun and interesting memorabilia for teams and leagues that are not around anymore, or teams that have just moved to new locations and have different personas now. Go to sportshistorycollectibles.com and use that promo code GOODSEATS and make sure that you get 15% off your purchases when you go there. Of course, our sponsor, our longtime sponsor, is our friends at Audible. And audibletrial.com/goodseats is the place to get your free 1-month subscription to the Audible service and a free audiobook download for you to enjoy. And this, I think, is our first guest, our first author, whose book is indeed in audiobook form. Yes, on Audible. There you go. You say it 3 times fast. It's not easy. Upton Bell's Present at the Creation is indeed an audiobook. That could be the first free book that you download using your free trial at Audible. audibletrial.com/goodseats. Get your free 1-month subscription, and why not use your free audiobook download credit for Upton Bell's book, Present at the Creation. And we're also going to have a very interesting promotional thing at the end of the show. So if you listen to the end of the show, you're going to have a chance to win a free copy of Upton Bell's book. It is a tremendous read. If you call yourself a football fan and a student of the history of the sport of football professionally in this country, you will thoroughly enjoy this book by Upton Bell. And listen, at the end of the show, the end of our interview, I will let you know how you too can win a free copy of Upton Bell's book, Present at the Creation. All right, so let us tease you into listening to the rest of the episode and figure out a way to get a free copy by listening to our very fun interview with Upton Bell here on the show. I had a chance to read a good portion of your book, especially, of course, the chapters devoted to the WFL escapades. And I'm not sure if you've got a chance to listen to any of our shows, but this week we've got our first of 2 episodes with one of the sort of researchers of the WFL, a guy named Mark Speck. And we've been doing this show for about almost a year now. And the fascination of teams and leagues and those kinds of things that have somehow come and gone for whatever reasons is an endless curiosity. And pro football, clearly, no shortage of such. And I suspect some of your personal stories and recollections are going to be very interesting to our audience who has glommed onto this odd and intriguing topic as I have.
Well, one thing I'll tell you before we start.
Sure.
Is and I've reminded people of this. And one of the reasons I went to the World Football League, there were many, but a lot of people don't remember the NFL, but they almost went under too. The early NFL was really the WFL, the AFL, every other thing. They lost 22 teams in the first 20 or so years. And Bert Bell's team, and very few of them were going to survive. If he didn't come up with the draft, you would be talking about history today, and there would be some other league that was started by somebody else. Maybe the All-America Conference, which was a big thing in Chicago. Arch Ward, who nobody trusted in the NFL, was the one behind that. But the NFL, if Bert Bell doesn't come along, my father, no league, period.
Well, let's use that as a segue because we have we've talked about some of those early years. We've had a couple of episodes, right? We've had our friend Ken Crippen on episode 18 talking about the All-American Football Conference. We've talked about the Cleveland Rams with our friend Jim Selecki in episode number 12, and we also did go very deep. One of our earliest episodes was about the Steagles. Which obviously your dad is probably part of. But so let's maybe start there because there's probably nobody in the business of professional football that had a more predestined DNA, shall we say, than you did, right? Given your father's experiences with the NFL and you growing up in and around that, no?
Right. Well, I think I'm probably the only person alive now with Dan Rooney gone. Art Rooney Jr. is a little bit older than me. That really knows the whole story from a club owners to a commissioners to a club owners to a team. I know the only thing I was missing was being born early enough to be in the Canton showroom with Jim Thorpe. But back to 1937, I can tell you everything.
Well, so let maybe some of those earliest childhood memories, I guess, because you're growing up as the son of the then NFL commissioner, right? And you're mentioning, right, not necessarily the strong and solid and future is bright NFL, but arguably a league that clearly in the shadow of Major League Baseball, right, the national pastime, and not necessarily a future that was guaranteed by any means, especially when you look at going through the war and stuff. So maybe some of your earliest memories as the son of the leader of the National Football League and all its.
Well, why don't I don't mean to interrupt, but why don't we just take it a little bit before that?
Sure.
Because I was the son of the owner of the Eagles, who paid one player $5 a week extra to babysit me.
Well, okay, let's hear about that. How does that happen?
So you tell me when you want to start. Are we recording or we're not recording?
Oh, we're going. Let's go.
Oh, we're going. I'm sorry. Okay, so what I'd like to do is take you back to really when I was born in 1937. I lived the first 4 or 5 years in a hotel that my father's father owned, the Ritz-Carlton in Philadelphia, and then lived in various homes around the area with 33 football players. And, of course, as a young child, you think it's pretty damn exciting to go from place to place, not realizing that the reason that he moved from place to place is what he could afford. And at that time, it was interesting because he and Art Rooney both founded their franchises at the same time, with the idea that they would try to survive together. Rooney, naming his team, originally it was not the Steelers, but he renamed the Steelers, and then Bert Bell came in and bought the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets with my mother's money, and walked by a sign, saw the National Recovery Act, and said that's the Eagles, and they were on their way. And actually, a friend of mine called me about 10 or 15 years ago, and he said, do you know that I think we've traced it? He was doing a story or a book on Art Rooney's life. He said that Art Rooney would send my father $100, $200, $500, $1,000 in dollar bills in an envelope to keep his franchise and payroll going. I mean, that was what it was really like. I mean, they not only merged the Steagles, but basically it was hand to mouth. And this is Bert Bell, the son of one of the richest men in Philadelphia, who was also the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, and owned hotels all over the place. Yet his father, who was very, very big, that actually one of the founders of the Walter Camp Rules Committee, John C. Bell, said to my father, I've lent you hundreds of thousands of dollars in the stock market. He said, but I am not going to get involved in pro football. College game is the game, and that's how my father ended up on his own. But those early years were just really amazing times. And as somebody that was a child growing up, you grow up around football players, you're living with them, and you grow up pretty quickly. You're a child, but you're really not a child. So that's why my memory's so damn good, is that in those times there were not the distraction of television or any of the cell phones or anything else like that. You paid attention to what people had to say, and I will say that the players of that time, and then going all the way through after the Second World War, they were men when they were 16, 17 years old. They went through the Depression. They knew what it was like to play for nothing. They weren't as big, quick, or fast as the people today. But I will tell you this. I learned more from them about life, how to deal with it, how to keep your mouth shut, how to go on through life, how to play through injuries. But in many cases, they were so mature, it was just really amazing. It's a lost generation. It was football's Paris of the 1920s. And the only one around was maybe a Red Smith. There was no Ernest Hemingway, but if it was, they would have romanticized one of the great stories of the game.
No, I suspect that we'll do even more episodes on specific teams and various challengers, and we've talked about even the Memphis Tigers, which never actually made the NFL, but could have been, and arguably on a good day beat a few NFL teams back in that era. Well, what do you think it was? And obviously, this is obviously through the prism of early childhood, which may not be crystal clear, but as you got older and sort of maybe looked back on it, what do you think it was about this, I guess, fledgling professional version of football that was such a glint in your dad's eye and all the players and people that you encountered in your youth? Well, what was it about the sport at that time, especially given it wasn't arguably a sure thing at that point?
It's the same thing for me today as it was then, and it's the lost art. And what it was, I'd use one word: love. It was a great love of something, and it wasn't money, because very few, if any, had money. That included players, owners, coaches. There was a love for the game itself and what it meant. And if there wasn't that love, like the love you find in a marriage or with a friend or something like that, it never would have lasted because there was no reason, and I understood this as a child, there was no reason on the face of the earth for people to do what they did then. They weren't going to make any money. My father never made a cent with the Eagles, which he then sold and became full-time partners with Art Rooney. He never made any money with the Steelers. He made decent money as commissioner, but that wasn't it. And I do understand that a book is coming out next year, written by a very famous writer in Baltimore that looks at the 6 original owners of the NFL: Bert Bell, the Maras, George Preston Marshall, Curly Lambeau, Art Rooney, those people. And it, again, he had said to me, and the book isn't out yet, he said, when you look at them and you look what they did and you look at the owners today, billionaires, he said, you're going to realize how much the world has missed with men like that. Now, they weren't saints, and they certainly weren't people that at all times were loving, but they loved something because there was no reason, none, to go on.
Yeah, and especially you look at something like World War II, clearly, too. That also was could have easily been a dagger, not only short term, but maybe for the whole kit and caboodle, right? And
well, yeah, and again, it was Bert Bell who stood up in the league meetings. Remember, he had the least amount of money of anybody. And he said, gentlemen, this is before he became commissioner. He said, if we close down, we will never reopen. Because a lot of them, other leagues were closing down for the Second World War, and he saw the problems, and he said, we will, if we close down, this was at the league meeting, had to convince them, we will never reopen again. Again, Bert Bell steps into the breach as an owner, and he stepped in the breach with the pro football draft that saved every sport. Stepped in the breach again, because if they had closed and the All-America Conference was coming one way or another, it would have been the old All-America Conference, and Paul Brown would have been commissioner, or Arch Ward from the Chicago Tribune. It wouldn't have been Bert Bell, and those teams, including the Giants, that did have some money, the Maras, they never would have opened again. And that's, again, the luck of life, but he had to convince them that this would be the doom. This would seal the doom of the league, and after all the things they survived, if they closed it down, it would never reopen again.
No, it's very interesting, and obviously lost on clearly a generation or two, frankly, of football fans, and this is partially why we sort of get back into these conversations. Why what starts out sort of as an exploration of what we say used to be in pro sports, right? Sometimes that seems to be just curious or even frivolous or hard to believe stories. But the reality is that, encompassed in all of those things are the foundational elements of what modern day fans and sport basically sort of enjoy today. I don't want to get too much into your dad's background, because this is really a story about you. But before we sort of move on to you and your professional football career as you advance in age into your teens and into your early 20s, I think it's helpful for the audience to sort of understand, especially those who don't know any better, these crazy kids today, some of the contributions that your dad did make as commissioner of the NFL, because some of those, frankly, are substantial, long-lasting, and elements of what exists today. Maybe you want to recall some of those.
Here's the amazing thing, and in fact, the NFL Network did on the anniversary of the draft last year a piece with myself and Ernie Accorsi, who was the former general manager of the New York Giants. Everything that Bert Bell instituted, that's now, let me see, almost 70 years ago, is still around today. The NFL draft, the first television policy, the waiver wire, the thing that Bill Belichick here and other coaches try to avoid every week, which is the injury report.
Sure.
And the reason he did that is in 1946, so right after he became commissioner, on Christmas, I think it was Christmas Day, he was called by Frank Hogan, the district attorney in New York, and said, I think that we have a betting scandal. You better get on a train and get to New York. It was the night before the championship game between the Giants and the New York Giants and the Chicago Bears. And they found out that two players had talked to gamblers. One, my father suspended immediately, Merrill Hapes, and the other one he let play in the game, Frank Filchuk. He then suspended him for life. What he did after that is still around today. He called a friend of his former quarterback of the Eagles was a quarterback by the name of Davey O'Brien, who went on after pro football to become one of the top people in the FBI and probably the best pistol shot in America. He called Davey O'Brien. He said, talk to J. Edgar Hoover. And he said, what I'm looking for ex-FBI agents who've either retired or out of the FBI that I can put in every city around the NFL, 12 teams then, and to check on gambling, to check on players that go into places where gamblers are, and I want a report every week. We will put them on part-time, and then he moved to say that every team must report by no later than Thursday what the injury report is, who is injured, who isn't, and the reasons why. And then what he did on top of it is that he would watch the point spread, and he knew 4 or 5 gamblers. There was a phone at our house. It was a red phone that would ring every Thursday through Sunday from people like, and I mention it in my epilogue, Frisco Legs and anonymous gamblers that would not give their full name and would call in right up to game time and give him the reports on what the point spread was. And if he saw it fluctuating and moving too much, he would immediately call the team and say, I want to know, is somebody hurt that you haven't reported? If they have, they can't play. So he instituted that. He instituted also the thing that Roger Goodell hides behind today. He had my uncle, his brother, was the governor of Pennsylvania and later the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. He had him right into the record and rules manual and the NFL bylaws that the commissioner, in the best interest of pro football, would have the right to rule on any disputes between owners and players and owners and owners. And that's still there, 60 or 70 years. And that was the Bert Bell rule. And he used that to protect himself not only from owners that he thought were getting out of hand, but also players. So there is a whole litany of rules that he put in that still remain in the rule book today. But the two major things, and I know that Pete Rozelle got credit for one of them, but it was really Bert Bell, the television policy and also the pro football draft.
Yeah, also things like sort of acknowledging and the union and the Pro Bowl and some of those things too, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that arguably, to your point, Rozelle certainly clearly given the sort of modernization mantle, right? But I think a lot of it, much of it, substantially goes back to Bert Bell, your dad, in the earliest of days of this league.
Every player today should get down on bended knee and thank Bert Bell, because he was the one that went to the owners and said, if you don't recognize the Players Association, you'll have to fire me. You think Goodell or you think anybody today would do that? Not. He was willing to put his job on the line, he said, because the players deserve a union and the players deserve the treatment. As a result, when he died, the owners then named the pension that every player gets today is the Bert Bell pension. Now, they added Pete Rozelle's name. Why? I have no idea. But it was and has always been the Bert Bell pension plan. And the other thing that he did is he went to a fellow in Baltimore by the name of Sig Hyman, of pension planners, and with Carol Rosenblum, who was his friend, the owner, he was the one that set in motion the monies that would go into, even in those days, in the 50s, so players would have something if they were injured or when their career was over. He loved the player, he loved the owner, and he was afraid of neither.
Very interesting. So with that kind of background, that kind of legacy, I think, frankly, just by osmosis, if not DNA, I said it earlier, do you feel you were preordained to have a career and a life in football? And did your dad even, as you were thinking about that, perhaps in your teenage years, et cetera, did he ever try to dissuade you from that or encourage you from that? Or how was your sort of life sort of evolving with relation to football that you can remember as you sort of got your seat, so to speak, as an adult?
My life was pretty damn good until, as you see in the first chapter of the book, and I hope people will get this book because it really tells the whole story up till today. My life was doing pretty well. I was a pretty good basketball player. In fact, I broke Tom Gola's record as a freshman at LaSalle College. Life was good. I knew that someday I'd probably be in pro football, but that wasn't on my mind. I was a kid. And I thought, well, whatever happens, eventually I'm going to be in the game, but I was thinking about college and I'm playing basketball. And then October the 11th came by, and my junior year at LaSalle College, I'm at a football game on a warm Sunday watching the Eagles and Steelers, the two teams that Bert Bell owned. My father's across the field, and he drops dead. At the football game, in the last 2 minutes, as the Eagles scored the winning touchdown, people say to this day, Red Smith, the great writer for the Times, Pulitzer Prize winner, said it was one of the greatest ways for anybody to go out. And I ran into Red years later and said, maybe for you, but not for me. Because on that day, everything changed. My life changed. I had to think about now what's going to happen. As you know, in life, when somebody passes like that, the people who were your friends might not be your friends anymore. And there might not be people who are willing to do things for you, give you a job in the NFL. They maybe an Art Rooney, somebody like that, maybe a George Halas, but you never know. The thing that I also learned that week was one of the great ironies of life is that Bert Bell had made a deal, never told his family about it. He was going to retire at the end of the year as commissioner of the NFL. He'd made a deal with the bank in Philadelphia to repurchase the team that he owned years ago, the Philadelphia Eagles, for $940,000. And if he had lived just to Wednesday, I would be talking to you as the owner of the Eagles, not as the owner of just Upton Bell. So all of those things kind of made life speed up. I had to make choices. I had to do things very, very quickly. And so going from a kid that loved life, loved football, playing basketball at LaSalle College, not a worry in the world, I went to somebody who was now 21 years old and had to figure a way to get into pro football before it was too late. And that's when Carl Rosenblum, who my father got into pro football with the Colts, I called him, met at his house in 1960 while we were watching the speech of JFK. And Rosenblum was a big backer of the Kennedys, actually a partner of Joe Kennedy, and to bring things quickly up to date, we made a deal. He sent me to training camp that summer in 1960. The Colts had won 2 championships in a row, one of the great teams of that time, with Johnny Unitas and Raymond Berry and Lenny Moore and Jim Parker, some of the greatest players, all in the Hall of Fame.
Sure.
And that was my start. Summer training camp, I come back, finish the final year at LaSalle, and then go back for good in 1961. And the rest of my life went pretty damn quickly.
So when you're in the Colts organization, what's your role? Is it defined? Is it, hey kid, come in and we'll try to find something for you? How wide-eyed were you, and what were you expecting, and what were they expecting, or maybe neither of you did expect anything at this point?
Well, they did the right thing. They started me at the bottom. I started in the ticket office, and worked my way up from the ticket office to the front office as the assistant personnel director, and then finally as the personnel director in charge of all scouting and signing of the players' contracts at that time. I had a pretty quick rise. I went there in 61, and by 64 I was in the scouting department, and by 67 I was the director of player personnel at the age of 27. So things went pretty quickly, and I think the reason is that I had that background for so long that when I got into the area that I really loved, that I knew. I was around players all my life. I knew who was quick and who wasn't. I knew how a person should catch a football. I knew how somebody should run. I knew all of those things. So with that background, I was able to go in and quickly assimilate what a scout needed to know. So that part of my background really helped me. If I hadn't grown up around football players and kind of studied them as a kid, probably that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because, you know, there's sort of a thing out there, right? If you kind of know at an early age kind of what you are good at and or what you want to do, it almost seems like, in many cases, not always, life does throw curveballs, et cetera, but, you know, you kind of almost orient some of your learnings and your thinking around some of those things, and it just becomes a natural sort of segue. And clearly, you know, you had a whole bunch of that, either unbeknownst to you or now more pronounced. It was almost like a reservoir of knowledge, right, that you could literally dip into, right? And obviously by your 20s, right, you're literally moving up the food chain very quickly, and I think that's a testament to your childhood background.
Well, you know something, and this is interesting, that the first time I went to a training camp, other than the Eagles when I was a kid, was the Chicago Bears and George Halas. And the first summer 1946 at the Bears training camp, and Clark Shaughnessy, who really changed pro football, took the running back and moved him out to a wide receiver. They didn't call it then. And really opened up the passing game for Sid Luckman and those great Chicago Bear teams. And their training camp was in Rensselaer, Indiana. And I remember Halas, who treated us not as a bunch of kids. Now remember, I'm just 9 years old, and my brother is 11. And he would let us come into the meetings at night and watch the coaches discuss the day's practice. And this is with Patty Driscoll and Luke Johnson. You know, two of them Patty Driscoll is in the Hall of Fame, and watched Clark Shaughnessy. I can't say at the age of 9 that I was sitting there saying, that's going to be the future of pro football. Well, I saw him draw up on the blackboard and explain to Halas how, you know, in those days you had the full backfield. You had the halfback, the fullback, and then another halfback. He was diagramming how to move a halfback out to what today we call the wide receiver, the flanker. And to see those things and then watch him practice as a 9-year-old, I never forget that because of two things. One, Halas didn't treat us like a bunch of kids, you know, get the hell out of here. He let us sit in and watch it. And you're never going to get that today. You're not going to let anybody do that. And that's why I always have a great feeling for the Halas family and the Chicago Bears. I wish they were as good today as they were then.
Well,
they're pretty damn bad.
Well, there are a lot of people in Chicago that would agree with that sentiment. There's no doubt about that. And I'm not from here. I'm married into a Chicago family, and it's pronounced. And there's a whole bunch of reasons I think as to why maybe that team has not gotten to that next sort of level, promised land, save for a season or two. All right. Well, so in the Colts, right? So I'm really curious. Give me some sense of what it was like being so involved with the Colts and a very successful franchise at that, but in particular vis-a-vis the AFL, right? Because, you know, across the aisle there, you had this fledgling league that was certainly more colorful, certainly taking chances, being a bit more daring, some more. How are you as an increasingly senior member of one of the more sort of vaunted franchises in the NFL? What was your take and the team's take on this upstart that was was it on your radar how much of it was? And arguably interesting to know because you ultimately went to one of the franchises that were part of that later, in the decade.
Unfortunately. Well, let me just start with saying this goes back to Bert Bell again, because Lamar Hunt came to my father in 1959 and said, I'd like to buy, at that time, there were two franchises. There was the Chicago Cardinals and the Chicago Bears. And the Cardinals eventually moved to St. Louis. A lot of people don't maybe remember, but the Chicago Cardinals in 1946, 47, and 48 were one of the best teams in football, with some of the greatest players, better than the Bears. And so Hunt wanted to buy the Cardinals, and my father said to him, wait. He said, we've got to we still have some teams in the red, including the Cardinals. Let's wait till we get in the black, and then let's talk. And then Hunt said, well, what about an expansion franchise? And he said, again, wait for a while. And he said, I promise you, we'll take you in. Well, Hunt, of course, my father dropped dead about 6 months later. But Hunt had come to him through Davey O'Brien, again back to the quarterback who played for him that I mentioned and the FBI people. Davey O'Brien was a friend of Lamar Hunt, so Lamar Hunt sent Davey O'Brien to see my father. And what Hunt wanted to do, Hunt said, I think I'm going to found a new league. He didn't say it that way. Hunt was a very shy person. And Hunt said, if I found a new league, would you, Bert Bell, be willing to be commissioner of both? And my father said, no, I can't do that. I thank you anyway, but it would. I mean, Hunt was really serious. He wanted Bert Bell to be the commissioner of both leagues, and they'd be, they play a championship game. Give me permission. I'm going to Congress this week because my father testified all the time before Congress on antitrust. And he said, if you'll let me do it, I will announce that there is a new league coming and we welcome the competition. And Hunt said, fine. And that's what happened. And then, of course, ABC takes over the AFL. They begin to blossom, at least to compete. And then I have a chapter in there about the war between the two leagues. And I felt like that they would have a chance to succeed where other leagues didn't, because they had people at Barron Hilton, and they had some people besides Hunt that really had money, Bud Adams and some other people. The other thing is that they had a television contract, which most other leagues didn't have. And, of course, the thing that I knew eventually would happen is that the NFL owners would get tired of driving up the cost on players that were doubling and tripling, and just say, you know what, we got to figure out a way to have a merger. But in the meantime, you have people like Pete Rozelle, who was the general manager of the Los Angeles Rams, and other NFL people that were paying, double, triple the amount of players. And there were everything from kidnappings to you name it, of players with the two leagues fighting for them. I once was what they call an NFL babysitter that went to Atlanta to try and protect 4 players from Georgia and Georgia Tech, one that we eventually drafted from the other league, and they were in a hotel down the street, and every time the players would visit us, then they go across the street and visit the other people, and you had everything going. Hunt sending Otis Taylor, who was a great player, with the Kansas City Chiefs, that made the catch down the sidelines that defeated Minnesota in that Super Bowl in 1970. You actually, I'm sorry, 71, but you actually had a situation where Hunt sent a plane and had 2 people take Otis Taylor out of a hotel room outside of Dallas and sneak him away from the NFL in one of his jets and then sign him. I mean, you can't believe what was going on between the two leagues. Today, they probably arrest half the people.
Yeah, we had a very good conversation, our third ever episode with Michael McCambridge, who arguably wrote the definitive biography of Hunt and his sporting life. And some really intriguing kind of stories, even to the point, too, where I think Hunt would even do some of those kind of clandestine meetings for folks like Crazy George Henderson, the professional cheerleader who he wanted to get for his teams and stuff. So we also had on our show early on. So I think that's also very interesting too, because for you to sort of see the eventuality, I guess, of the AFL and its, I guess, as the years went on, sort of inevitable end point in some way, shape, or form, right? They did have leverage, right? They had a television contract. They had money. They had owners who were willing to, stick it out for a period of time and had the wherewithal to do so. I think it's really interesting, especially in contrast to what we'll talk about in a couple of seconds or in a minute or two, is the WFL, which had little to none of those things, right? And
they did, but I will tell you this. Here's the breaking point. Here's what really made the merger. When the AFL brought Al Davis in as acting commissioner, and Davis went out and signed every big name, secretly signed. John Brody, all of the quarterbacks. He signed all the top quarterbacks, not the Unitas or the Stars, but all the top quarterbacks in the NFL and all the top players. Signed them with secret contracts. And when the owners found out about it in the NFL, that was what made the merger. As much as I disliked Davis about certain things, he was really brilliant with that. He said, you know what? He convinced the AFL owners, he said, this is war. And he said, you give me the power, and I'll go out, and I guarantee you, because there are a lot of players underpaid in the NFL, and I guarantee you we'll be able to sign them. And he did. And the minute the NFL saw that, and some of them awakened, I think Billy Wade, who was with Hallis at that time, I think they signed Billy Wade. They signed everybody. And in fact, a little unknown secret is that Davis was really PO'd because he didn't want the merger. He said, we can beat these people. And he wanted to continue on as commissioner. And they finally went to him and said, Al, look, Tex Schramm and Lamar Hunt and some other people put together this merger. I'm sorry, you're out. Davis was really pissed off because he felt that they got a new contract with NBC. They dropped ABC, they got NBC, they got the money, and they went out. And by the way, I would have been in favor of having peace, but I would have been in favor of maintaining the two distinct leagues meeting in a Super Bowl the way it originally was. I didn't like it at all. This AFC and NFC is crap. That was really because there was two different styles of football. NFL much more conservative. AFL wide open. AFL more great African American players, which, by the way, I detail in one of my chapters in my book about being in the South during the 60s and the great emergence of the great African American players and the prejudice that you see in the South and the consideration on the NFL, whereas the AFL would go in and they sign many, if you look at their rosters, of the really great African American players. That was the difference in the leagues, and I'll tell you something. To this day, I wish it had remained two separate leagues under one commissioner with a championship game.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's almost taking a page out of Major League Baseball, right? The American League and the National League having some unique sort of differences. Arguably, that's gotten less and less distinctive as the years have gone on, and money has become more of an issue. But that would be a very interesting sort of different dynamic. But that said, you were clearly quite part of a very successful franchise with the Colts, right? Whatever which way it was, right? As an NFL franchise, but then obviously as the beginnings of the merger started to happen and that Super Bowl, or what became the Super Bowl, sort of happened. I mean, you were part of a very successful franchise going into the early 1970s. I guess you were a hot commodity, right? And hence the move to what then became the New England Patriots in 1971, no?
Well, one of first and foremost, because the Colts, we agreed along with Cleveland and Pittsburgh to move over into what became the AFC because they needed they needed not only quality, but they needed, I think it was 13 and 13, 26 at the time. But I would say, like all people, I committed the chief mistake of youth, which was, I had everything going in Baltimore, and there were other teams that were interested in me as a general manager. And I saw that I could move into the Patriots and completely rebuild them, which I was able to bring in some of the top people in football. But the mistake was, which nobody should make, is that I got a verbal agreement that I would have the right to hire and fire the head coach. But I never got it in writing, and that ended up, and people warned me. A lawyer warned me and said, you know something? If you don't have it in writing, don't go. But when you're 32 years old, you think you can change the world. To a degree you can, but not completely. And that was my downfall, not getting that. And when I wanted to fire the coach, we had the team really going, good people coming in. The owner stepped in and said, you're not going to do it. And that from that on in, it was downhill, and eventually I got fired because I couldn't get along with the owner. And I was only, when I was fired, I was only 35 years old, which most people are just starting off at that time. So enter the WFL.
Yeah, I think it's a quick point here. I mean, at the time, you're the youngest general manager in the NFL, and quite something and quite substantial in terms of your presence. And I think it's also probably a lesson that a lot of people sort of. I mean, at the end of the day, owners own, right? And the people who work for, whether it's and knowing the best about the sport or the business or whatever, right? Not always owners know how to own. They don't necessarily know how to run. But obviously, at the end of the day, the tie goes to the person writing the checks. It's an issue, right?
It's a great line that I told Ernie Accorsi of the Giants. Is there are only two things in the NFL? You're either an owner or a renter, and you'll always be a renter, whether you're Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, anybody, Vince Lombardi, you name them. They were all renters, just like Upton Bell. And that was the key. If Bert Bell had lived another couple of days, I would be an owner, and I would be renting people.
All right, just when it was getting interesting, let's bring this to a grinding halt, shall we? Just kidding. We got to pay the bills around here, and our friends at Audible have been very helpful in attempting to allow us to pay some of those bills, and we want to call them out now and remind you that a free audiobook download is yours for the taking, and also a free 1-month subscription to the service of Audible at audibletrial.com/goodseats. Again, audibletrial.com/goodseats for your free 1-month trial of the Audible service, and most interestingly, a free audiobook download for you to enjoy. 180,000 titles and growing every day to choose from, and there's absolutely no excuse to not find at least one title amongst that cavernous selection available to you that you won't find to be enjoyable and good for the soul, including a couple of books that might be interesting to our audience. And yes, some new ones, frankly, that I'm finally listening to. One that I'm listening to right now is by Carson Cunningham. It's narrated by Paul Bamer, and it's called Underbelly Hoops, Adventures in the CBA, a.k.a. the Crazy Basketball Association, which is really, of course, about the Continental Basketball Association, which for many years was sort of this ragtag minor league of the NBA. And it's a book I'm about 2 chapters into right now, and hopefully maybe a guest will get for a future episode. Also in my queue, next up, is another guest that I'd like to get. And her book that she wrote is also narrated by her. Her name is Jeannie Buss. And of course, Jeannie is the daughter of Jerry Buss, of course, the wildly successful founder of the Los Angeles Lakers and the LA Forum. And Jeannie is clearly today the brains behind the Los Angeles Lakers today. She and her brothers were active, of course, in things like, along with her father, World Team Tennis, the Major Indoor Soccer League with the LA Lasers, all kinds of stuff. So her book is next on my list. That's called Laker Girl, and that too is available on Audible. And again, it's one of the many thousands of titles that you can choose from when you go to audibletrial.com/goodseats. And again, you too can get your free audiobook download to give it a try, perhaps one of those two, or perhaps one of the other 180,000 titles available to you as well. Give it a try, audibletrial.com/goodseats. Thanks for listening, and back to our conversation. All right. Well, let's get into this wacky WFL. It's on my brain. Yep. It's in our listeners' brains as our previous episodes, and it's taken us a while to get to it. But boy, oh boy, what a rich and textured set of stories for a league that was a mere blip in the history of professional football and sports in this country. But let's go back. So you're out of the Patriots organization. Obviously, football very much still in your blood. I based on what I've read in your book, it would probably be fair to say that there wouldn't be a situation that wouldn't be interesting to you if just given the chance to do so. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a sense of where you were and where your head was at before and during the WFL coming a call-in, so to speak.
Well, first and foremost, I wasn't necessarily looking to go to the WFL, but I knew that in the case of the NFL, which I talk about in my book, that again, back to the owner and renters, Billy Sullivan, the owner, made sure to let the other owners, because he didn't want to look bad, basically say, Bell did nothing but try and take my team away from me and this and that. And, in those days, which would not happen today, if two or three owners, I won't call it blacklisting, but if two or three owners say, you better be careful with him, you might not work for a long time, if ever. And I was interviewed by 3 top teams after the Patriots thing, but all of a sudden the lines went dead, and I think I know why. So basically, I always thought that I wanted to be an owner, and the only way I was going to be an owner was to go into a league like many people. I mean, Al Davis was just a coach. He ended up being an owner because he went into a new league and eventually, in a power struggle, won out as the owner of the Oakland Raiders. But I had looked at Charlotte, North Carolina, years before when I was scouting for the Colts. There was another league. It wasn't called the International League, but there was a player I was interested in that played in like a semi-pro league in Charlotte, and his name was Winston Mapp, and he was a pretty good receiver. And I just went by. I think it was a Continental League. That was another league, and I took a look at him. I started to get familiar with Charlotte, and I really liked it. And I thought that Charlotte someday might be an NFL franchise city, if not a WFL city. So I went down, met with the mayor, who was one of the richest, most powerful people in the South, John Belk of Belk Department Stores. I talked to him about the situation there, and I was thinking about possibly bringing a team there. And he was okay, but he was a big Redskins fan because, remember, North Carolina and Georgia and those areas, especially when the Redskins first went south with George Marshall, was a big Redskins area. So anyway, I finally convinced him, and then I went to Howard Baldwin, who's now a big Hollywood producer, and was the one, by the way, who made the movie Hoosiers, and said, I'm interested, because he was partners with Bob Smertz, who owned the Celtics at the time, but also owned the New York Stars, and convinced him to let me take the Stars, because Smertz was in real financial trouble, and transfer them from New York to Charlotte, North Carolina, which is what I did. In fact, I remember the day that I held a press conference with Baldwin to say that they were leaving, and Howard Cosell said, Listen, young man, Upton Bell, who the hell do you think you are taking a team from the greatest city in America down to that dump in North Carolina? I still laugh to this day because Cosell was such a put-on. But anyway, I took the team to Charlotte, and our opening game was against the Memphis Southmen, who a year later would have Zonka kick in Warfield, which started the football wars all over again. And we sold out all 4 games there within 2 days out of a hotel there, a motel called the Bangor Motel. The ticket office was set up in the lobby of the hotel, and we sold it out. And I knew from then on in that I had the right city and a pretty good team, but I also knew that the league was already in a lot of trouble.
Well, let's back up. Let's back up for a second, because I think it's very important stuff that I want to get to, because you're really dancing onto it. Howard Baldwin, somebody we actually want to get on the show at some point. So keep your fingers crossed, because there are a lot of interesting stories there. Or hockey, of course, but
yep.
Howard Baldwin, right, is the interesting connections that I've learned over time. Right, is he's a WHA owner, right, with the New England, I think it was the Whalers, right, or they became the Hartford Whalers later on.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to the story, right, because that's a relationship that became strong with a guy named Gary Davidson, right, who was the instigator of this whole WFL in the first place.
A total rip-off artist.
Okay, so let's get in. Don't sugarcoat it, Upton. How about give us some sense of how you and Howard Baldwin and the process by which you even considered getting involved in this league kind of got going. Even before you knew the Stars was going to be it, even before you knew Charlotte was going to be the place that the Stars were to go. Give us some background as to like how you got ensnared, shall we say, or entranced by, depending on your perspective, this league and Davidson in particular.
Well, I'll get to Davidson in a few minutes. But first and foremost, Howard, who lived outside of Boston, he and I were friends, and he came to visit me one day with his attorney, Bob Caparel, who did a lot of work for Howard, and said, you know what, I'd like to get you interested in this league. He said, you have a big name. He said, now, at the time, first and foremost, he really brought the league to Boston first, but he didn't keep it here. It went to New York with Smarts, but it was first here, and it was only here for a while, but then I think he saw that before the season even started, it wasn't going to happen, so he moved it to New York with Smarts. But he said, where do we get you involved in this league? He said, we're trying to get big names into the league, and particularly football people that are well known. And he said, well, I can have my lawyer, Bob Caparel, look around at different franchises. And he said, would you be interested? I said, yeah, but I said, I've got a place picked out, whether it's this league or some other league. And I said, it's North Carolina. I said, so whatever team I would take over, I would want to take it to Charlotte, North Carolina. And the first thing was he said, well, let me have Gary Davis and some people take a look around. The first thing was to take the Detroit Wheels there, but the Wheels went out of business before I could even get to them, and it would be a bad deal. They were no longer in business. So then Baldwin came back to me and he said, Smarts might want to get rid of it. Actually, Baldwin, as his partner, had a deal with the very famous Broadway producer David Merrick to buy the team for $2 million and take it off Smart's hands. And they were playing out in Long Island at the time, at not a very good place. But Merrick had the money and everything else, and they wanted to sell it. But Smarts kept saying, "No, I want more money." And because of that, David Merrick said, "The hell with you. I'm not going to do it." So Smarts was stuck with it. And Smarts was getting in deeper financial trouble with his partners at the Celtics. So he wanted to dump the team, and that's when Baldwin said, "How about the Stars?" I said, "Well, I'll take them over." I said, on a deal, on an agreement with Smarts, I'm not going to buy them. I'll take them over with an option to buy them if they make it in Charlotte, North Carolina. So Baldwin arranged it. And I remember going to New York and meeting with Smertz at his flat in New York, having dinner there, and Smertz handing me a check for $10,000. He said, "This will get you going." And we signed an agreement that if I could get the investors together in Charlotte, that I would pay him $2 million. Of course, that never happened. But Baldwin he had founded it was originally the Boston Whalers and then the Hartford Whalers. But then after that, he got involved in football too with Davidson. He had me meet with Davidson about 6 or 7 months before I actually got involved and took the team to Charlotte. And my first impression of Davidson is that this is a quick buck artist. This is a guy that sells franchise like you and I would sell hamburgers, and that he wasn't in it because he loved sports or anything else like that. He's a business guy. He had founded the WHA, and luckily for them, they survived some really bad times, not because of him, but because some of the people that eventually came in the WHA were able to hang on long enough that they finally got somewhat of a merger with the NHL. So, but my initial impression of Davidson is the same impression I have today, that he quick buck artist in and out. And that's what really, in the end, killed the WFL. There were some there were terrific coaches. There were really good players. There were some rule changes that I really liked. They, like the old AFL, really appealed to a lot of really good African-American players around the country. But Davidson was so quick to go in there and get anybody that would pay some money for a franchise without looking to these people have any stability. And that was, of course, my worry from the very beginning, but my feeling was that if the Hornets could last long enough in Charlotte, that someday they would go into the NFL. Of course, I was right. It just wasn't me.
Yeah, well, that's especially interesting, right? Because now, I got to ask you this sort of pointed question, right? So,
sure.
Given the WFL, right, and given your, shall we say, highly qualified understanding, I guess, of a non-football guy in Davidson, right? So your antennae were certainly up, right, and certainly not something to ignore. Does the heart take over at that point? And say, this is football. This is another shot. This is a fledgling league. I sense Charlotte's an opportunity. I've always said so. What was going through your head sort of to balance the pros and cons, I guess, no pun, maybe pun, on your
lot of cons
of Gary Davidson and the shakiness of the league?
Well, first and foremost, I remember talking to some of the other owners in the league, and I said, how soon can we get him out? So I understood. Part of me said, I want to be an owner. I want to run this team properly. I want to bring something good to Charlotte. The other part of me said, I don't know if the league can last if Davidson's around too long. And ironically, we did get rid of him at the end of the first year. But so much damage had been done, even though we came back the second year with Chris Hemmeter with a new plan, it was too late. But, that's from the very beginning I very realistic, that unless you got him out, and could you get him out in time, that with all the good things that I liked about the league, the other part of it is that it wouldn't last.
So did you ever get to a Stars game at Downing Stadium on Randall's Island, that sort of dilapidated stadium, before you made the purchase and went through that press conference, or were you kind of getting it?
No, I did not. I had no interest. I knew Babe Perilli, who was the coach, who I did replace in the second year, but I knew Babe, and I knew a lot of the players. Now, remember, some of the players we had played against and lost in the biggest upset at that time in NFL history, the Jets. There was Jerry Philbin, who played against us in 1968. There was John Elliott, and there were other players that I was familiar with. And for that league, I knew the team was pretty good. I knew Randall's Island was ridiculous. And as long as they were there, it didn't make any difference. They're New York Stars. Nobody was going to go see them play. So I had no interest in seeing them play. I had no interest in going to Randall's Island. I knew their roster pretty well. I knew their coaches. In fact, there were coaches on their staff that one of them, what's his name, Tom, is still in the NFL today. Was Peyton Manning's coach. Was one of our coaches. I knew the coaching staff. I knew Babe. I knew the players. So I said to myself, I'm not taking some dog team over. I'm taking a decent team over in this league that can play competitively, and I'm taking it to a city that whatever happens with the league is going to be a major league city someday. So those were my considerations, all the while knowing the danger too of dealing with Smertz, because he was very desperate and he kept calling, all the time, if you got my money yet, if you this or that, and also a lot of the people that he owed up there, cleaning services, everything else like that, they came down and eventually sued us. And actually, as I have in the book, one game we were playing in Shreveport the first year, and if you remember the sheriff out of the Dodge commercial, that sheriff in Louisiana came in and was going to arrest everybody unless we gave them the equipment that was our equipment that was under some type of lien to a cleaning agency in New York City. So we ended up playing the game, and then afterwards the sheriff took over all the uniforms, and our team flew back to Charlotte without any uniforms. We finally got them out for the next game, but that's what the league was like.
Well, I got to say, this is an interesting point of order here. So it seems to me that the I guess the reclaiming of uniforms was a common thing in this league, right? This is not the first story I've heard where uniforms were taken as either collateral or whatever. What is it with the uniforms? Like, who's thinking that these things are actually valuable enough?
They're not, but you can't play the game without them. So, in many franchises, Birmingham, who ended up playing in the championship game the first year before they closed the league down the first year, and played against Florida, who was owned at the time by Robbie Loud, who worked for me here, they owed back taxes to the IRS and everything else like that. They played the championship game, and they were going to confiscate the uniforms for that. Because again, what's the easiest thing to grab? If the owner has no money and the players are hardly making anything, what do you grab? You grab the uniforms because the team can't play without them.
All right. Well, some more comicalness, at least from my perspective, right? Okay. So I guess I'm
sure.
I'm really curious, right? So how do you effect a shift and a move of a franchise literally in the middle of the season and literally, I don't know, a number of days before your next game, which is an away game? How does that even? I mean, I know Houston moved to Shreveport. You guys moved down to Charlotte, obviously with a stop in Chicago first for your first game as Charlotte. I want to talk about that in a second. Two franchises that already folded sort of outright. Was there any reservation in your mind in this process, given all those things? And did you have any presence of mind to sort of say, "Holy cow, I'm moving a franchise in the middle of the season"?
Nah,
work?
No. Well, a couple things. Remember. Now I'm going back to past experiences back in the 30s and 40s, and so I was kind of used to, as a kid, moving from place to place, and kind of absorbing the idea that the great NFL that we know today don't think they didn't go through things like that, and probably worse. So to me, the bottom line is looking through it. Did I have the right city? Yes. Did I have what I thought was a representative right team? Yes. So I did a lot of work before I took them over. I had gone to Charlotte 2 or 3 times, met with the mayor. I set up a deal with the city stadium there. I set up a place for our operation at the Bangor Hotel. I went out to Belmont Abbey and set up a training site that could be taken in overnight. I had practically everything planned. So when the time came, they played, I think it was on a Thursday night. Friday, Babe Pearlie and I were on a plane down there to hold a press conference. Saturday, the team came in, Saturday or Sunday, and immediately bussed out to Belmont Abbey. We got them dorm rooms for the players out there. And a lot of people in Charlotte were absolutely fabulous. To this day, I say some of the best people I ever dealt with. So I knew how to do all of that work ahead of time. So it wasn't any big deal to me.
That's interesting. Do you want to talk about the little incident or the specific mechanics of getting the team ready for their first ever game as Charlotte, and I guess still named, the Stars, but playing away in Chicago? Seems a little interesting stories there.
Well, we played, we had to play on the road before we came home against, the Memphis Southmen. And I think it was a Thursday. I think we played on Thursdays then because they did have a TV contract for a while with Eddie Einhorn's network, TVS.
Right, the TVS television network. And we have a really great episode with the director and producer of those telecasts, Howard Zuckerman. A great episode. I highly encourage our audience, and if you haven't yourself, to listen to it. It's a wild story, including things like parking the truck in the middle of the country, waiting to hear where they were going to go because there were so many franchise moves. I mean, crazy.
Well, that's absolutely right. And actually, that they did pretty well in the ratings in the beginning. But there's a lot of stories with that. But we did not open up, but as a new team. In fact, our equipment manager had to go. I think he went to the Bears.
Yes, that's
and got the Bears, or the equipment manager at the Bears, to help them get new jerseys that will reflect Charlotte instead of the New York Stars. So we did open up in Chicago. In fact, remember that there were a lot of old NFL stars hanging around. I think Butkus was there that night with the Chicago team, and of course they eventually went out of business. But they that wasn't, the players kind of accepted the whole idea, because I said to them after the game, I said, we're going to Charlotte. You're going to find the weather nicer. You're going to find a situation where people really want you. And once they kind of absorbed that, we got on a plane, went to Charlotte, and got ready to play against a sold-out house against the Memphis Southmen. And actually, by that time, I got Arnold Palmer to invest in the team. He gave me a gold Cadillac to ride around the town in, and he came to the opening game. We had a big party afterwards, and Palmer came in. Palmer had the largest Cadillac agency in North Carolina at that time, in Charlotte. And so there were a lot of people that were really good, and it was a tremendous experience for the city and for everybody else. Even though I knew storm clouds were out there with different franchises that were in financial trouble.
Well, it was clearly a validation of that the Charlotte, all the homework that you had done previously was absolutely ripe and ready for professional football. For our completists out there, though, before we get into a little bit of that, I really want to sort of nail this down. So you were, in your first week playing against Chicago, you were known as the Charlotte Stars at that point?
It was the Charlotte Stars, and I had run a promotion with the Charlotte Observer and the Charlotte News to name the team. So we ran the promotion. I think it ran for about a week or so, and they left it up to me, and I said, who got the most votes? And it was the Charlotte Hornets, because there was a Hornets baseball team there years before. And so the papers, the fans picked the name. So it was the Charlotte Hornets. That's how we got the name.
And was it the Charlotte Hornets by the time you had your first home game against Memphis, or was it still the Stars before then you ultimately?
I believe it was the Charlotte. No, it was the Charlotte Hornets by that time, because I wanted it ready for the opening game.
Got it. So technically, you were the Charlotte Stars for one game during this season.
Yep, that was it.
Very interesting. And I thought I heard a story. You mentioned the equipment manager. I think your equipment manager, I think just out of sheer desperation, called the Bears and got some stickers of the letter C and put them on top of the Stars for your
Yep, that's right. That's what he did. And again, the thing that I would like to point out to people, things seem so easy when you look at the NFL today. Somebody buys a team for near $1 billion or more, and they're in the club. But most of the other leagues that were founded in any sport went through these different things, and you had to be able to deal with it. But again, now it's so easy. But when you look back at the start of all of these leagues, including baseball, this is the way it was. And if you were lucky enough, you survived it. If you didn't, if your television contract or the owners, a lot of owners went broke in a lot of leagues. So for me, I wasn't as panicked as maybe other people were.
Yeah, and you know what? So it's very interesting. You mentioned in the book, and I highly, obviously, encourage the book is rich of stories, but these in particular on this the WFL stuff. You mentioned in the '74 season that you even went out of your way to ensure that the Florida Blazers, one of many franchises who were just literally going sideways financially, that you literally stuck up and paid, the salary for the team for 1 week to play to ensure that they were going to play. But I thought it was interesting as you referred back to why you did it. It actually goes back to that circle, right? Of what you remembered of your dad's doing and the original owners of the league back in the NFL days, early NFL days. That's kind of what you kind of had to do to kind of keep this thing going, and you helped out other members of the club, so to speak, to keep going.
Well, two things here. Well, one, let me go back first, and then I'll explain the rest of the story, because the book is 300 some pages, and that there was more to that Blazer story, which I'll tell you in just a minute. But going back, I can remember, I think it was 1937 or 38, my father had no advance. In those days, what the owners did in the NFL is, if you didn't have any advance gate at all, you would call the game and you would say, game called because of rain, even if it was 70 degrees out and sunny. There were many times when owners canceled games because they had no gate. So in this case, my father called the team in the NFL at that time was actually owned. It was called the Brooklyn Dodgers, like the baseball team, but it was an NFL team, and they were due to come in and play the Eagles. But my father was playing wasn't at Shibe Park, it was at Municipal Stadium, which then, of course, eventually was where the Army-Navy game was played. There was almost 100,000 seats there. And my father called the owner and said, you know what, I don't have a ticket sold. He said, I'd like to call the game or put it off for a week. And the owner said to him, you're not calling that game off. He said, I'm dating Sonia Henne now, the Olympic star. Skater. He said, I'm dating her now, and I told her, I promised her a game in Philadelphia, so you better play that goddamn game. My father said, there are no tickets sold. And he said, I don't care. I promised her that game. I'm coming down, and you better play the game. So he ended up playing the game. I don't think there was one person in the stadium. There were 100 people in the press box eating his hot dogs, and it was all because Sonia Henne wanted to see a game, and that's the way it was. So you go from that and you go to where I was in 1974 and 75, and I'd say, geez, this is an improvement. So now we go to the Florida situation. Florida had a terrific team. They had Bob Davis, who was the All-American quarterback at Virginia. They had Tommy Riemann, who was the best running back in the league. They had a terrific team. They're owned by Romney Loud, who didn't have a nickel, and later died prematurely and was into drugs and everything else like that. So I get a call about, I think it was 2 days before the game, and it's the judge, and he's in court there. And he called and he said, I am going to stop this team from flying or going anywhere because the only thing they can afford is toilet paper. I've got him on the speaker system in my lawyer's office. And he said, they don't have enough money to come up. And he said, I'm legally not going to, I'm going to hold Rami Loud in contempt. He said, so you have only one choice. If you're willing to pay their way up and pay ready for this, pay their game check, I'll let them go. If not, they stay here. Now, I had the game sold out. So what the hell am I going to do? Am I going to now say to the press in Charlotte and the people who bought the tickets, no game because the team can't afford their way to pay their way up? So I said to the judge, I said, I will get the airline and I will pay for the charter flight up and I'll pay a game check. It might be the only time in history. And that's what we did. And actually, they upset us that night. And I remember going down on the field after the game and talking to Davis. And Davis said, thanks for everything. And he said, thanks for the game check. I said, thanks for everything. You just beat us. And that's the story. That's how they got up.
Well, and that was repaid in kind, right, with another kick in the butt, so to speak, when it came to playoff time. You want to sort of regale our audience in sort of that shenanigan, too?
Well, actually, we were due, because we had a pretty good team, we were due to start the playoffs. And the week before, of course, a week or 2 weeks before they'd taken the uniforms, I got them back. But basically, what John Bassett, who was really the commissioner of the league, Davison, they got out that year. And John Bassett, basically, he was the most powerful owner, basically said, we've got to figure this thing out. And so we'll put in, if teams can't afford to pay their way into the different sites around, we would prefer for them to stay out. And you're one of the teams that we would prefer to stay out for the time being. And ordinarily, I would fight them on that. But basically, because of the financial situation, I said, that's fine. At this time, there were no tickets sold in Charlotte, and we were going to have to play on the road. I said, if that's the way it is and you can explain it, go ahead and explain it, because I'm not going to explain it. So that's how we and some other pretty good teams ended up not in the playoffs that year. As it turned out, I'm just as glad, because we probably would have played someplace on the road where there'd be nobody in the stands. It's like Bert Bell back in 1937.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it gives you the whole state. Well, all right. So, I mean, it seems a little odd and sad, right? I mean, you qualify for the playoffs. Ostensibly, you play to get into the playoffs and ostensibly to potentially be in a position to win a championship. But then, while financial realities take precedence, of course, it seems almost fruitless if that's what's going to happen near sort of the end of it. But all right, I guess that's sort of just a huge indication, if there weren't many others, right? That the post-mortem on this season, I mean, obviously limping along, you made a reference to the World Bowl being basically the broke bowl, right? There's no doubt that this league is just falling apart at the seams. Give our audience some sense that you were still very much obviously committed to Charlotte as a market. You had obviously experienced a whole bunch of success there. Much of your inklings were correct. How, though, do you square that with what is just basically a complete shambles of a postseason? And you mentioned Hemeter is sort of stepping up. How do you think about doing another year of this?
But that's what I saw was the best thing that could happen is if there was a self-destruct and a new league came out of it. And we had decided way before then to have a crucial meeting in Memphis as soon as the season's over and re-establish the league with new owners and with Chris Hemeter with a plan they called the Hemeter Plan that would now, you could sign players, but you had, if you were going to pay a lot of money, you had to show that you had the money in the bank to be able to sign them, that you just weren't going to go out and sign them. Now, Zonka, Kick, and Warfield were coming in that year, and we'd signed a lot of NFL players. But unless your team could afford them, now John Bassett, the Carling Brewery, John Bassett had millions of dollars, and that's how he was able to sign Zonka, Kick, and Warfield. And in some ways, ironically, because Don Shula and I were friends for years, that stopped Miami's great run. If you remember, Miami won in 72 and 73, and then 74, they had lost Oakland, but they were still the power, and they might have been the power instead of the Steelers. But remember, they lost Zonka, Kick, and Warfield to John Bassett. So the whole idea was a new league, financial responsibility, get rid of the old owners. Davidson's gone, and that really appealed to me. And Hemmeter was a really smart guy, a very brilliant guy. In fact, he was so impressive that Joe Marshall, who was the assistant at Sports Illustrated, who was covering this trip around the league in the off season, decided to leave Sports Illustrated and become the assistant commissioner of the league. He was impressed with what it looked like, that it was now a new responsible league, and still had many new players coming into it and a lot of things going for it. So that's my reason. I was kind of happy in some ways that they shut us down and other teams, because we're going to go anywhere unless, as I talked to the other owners in the league, unless we reestablished a league with different people. And the big question then was, which eventually took the league down and into the second season, is that they had lost so much credibility. We had gotten some fairly decent owners that had money, but what happened was, like everything else, is what the NFL will eventually face with concussions and some of the other things they're doing. Once you lose credibility with the public, even if you're well established for the next year, it's too late.
Do you think that that Joe Namath rebuffing the entreaties by the Chicago now Winds, do you think if he were to have signed, and there was obviously rationale, I guess, for his agent and stuff to ultimately not sign, do you think if Namath had signed, that might have changed the trajectory?
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And again, in my book, President of the Creation, I knew about that. There were only a couple of us owners that knew the deal, and what we had decided was, again, how do we get a TV contract for the second year? Because the NFL was worried. In fact, it's funny. But remember that the NFL in 74. Either 74 or early 75, they actually, the NBC called me and said, the NFL looks like they're going to be on strike. If they do, we'd like to do one of your games. And in the meantime, I'm backtracking a little bit. I had made a deal with Ted Turner to do my games. I got a TV contract with TVS, which he owned in Charlotte. And Turner and I met, really fascinating, which I talk about in the epilogue in the book. Ted Turner and I meet, and Turner said, you know what? I'm going to make you big boy through not only in Charlotte, but all throughout the South. My whole TV network will carry all your games. We had made a deal. We had gotten new ownership in there, and the key was television. So we had a meeting with Hemmeter, and the whole idea was this. We talked to Joe's agent, and here's another thing I think I put in the book, that we all agreed that we signed Namath. We were told we would get with TVS, and we had another group interested, guaranteed contract for full WFL games. And Namath, of course, would be the focal point. He'd go to Chicago, which we wanted in a big, big city. We were going to bring it to, or if he really wanted, we would have him put together a group and bring it back to New York. And what happened was, the stupidity of it is that the owners when it went to a vote of the owners, the whole idea was that TBS and another network said, look, you're not going to get much money out of it your first couple of years. We want a huge thing here. But the biggest thing was that Namath and his attorney, basically, who's still his attorney today, I believe, said, we want a bigger piece for Joe than this. Let's say we want, instead of 50%, we want 75%. And stupidly, and I remember saying to the owners, listen, give him whatever he wants, because if you don't give him whatever he wants, you have no league. You have no league without a TV contract. But they were so small-minded and stupid that basically they said, no, we don't want to give up that much. We want more money for ourselves. Does that sound familiar, even today?
Sure.
So what happened was the deal with Namath and his attorney fell through. And in fact, we had even gotten to a point, and I had proposed, I said, where we are today. Tom Brady is always bitchy and moaning about, don't go near my knees, and the NFL now, quarterbacks hardly get touched anymore. But we had worked out a deal, and I said, look, Namath has, really fragile knees. Let's just make it look good, whether it's wrestling or not, but nobody hits Namath's knees. So we had agreed that if this whole deal went through, that you still rush the passer, but instead of creaming him, you just like the offensive lineman ride him by the quarterback. So there it was. There was the chance for the league. The NFL, remember, it was the 70s. The NFL was strong, but it still wasn't the behemoth it is today. And so if you get a TV contract, you get Namath. We've got Sonica, Kick, and Warfield coming into the league. We have other people coming in. We have fairly good stability. And because 2 or 3 owners said, to hell with them, we're not going to give them that much money, there was the chance, and it was gone.
And you're all this time still trying to raise dough for the Charlotte franchise to ostensibly pay back Schmertz, as well as, have the outright ownership of the franchise, right?
Well, yeah, but the biggest thing, and it's a fascinating story, biggest thing is the North Carolina National Bank, led by Luther Hodges, whose father was the agriculture secretary under JFK, and Luther was one of the most brilliant young bankers in America, and his assistant was Hugh McCall, who eventually took over the Bank of America and just retired a couple of years ago. They were behind the team. They were going to help us. In fact, they gave us free offices in their beautiful building in the NCNB in Charlotte. And what has happened is we had actually a public offering the second year around. And, of course, I talk about it in the book. It's another bizarre but really interesting thing. A guy flies up from Memphis by the name of Paul Sasso. And he said, flies in his private jet, comes over, and he said, I read about your plight, and he said, I'm going to put a couple of million into the team. He said, I want equal ownership with you, Upton. And he said, I've got a model of a stadium. I want to go over and meet with the mayor and show him. We took him over to the mayor, and Belk seemed to like it. Underground parking, all these other things. Dome stadium because of the heat in Charlotte in the summertime. To make a long story short, 3 days later, he is essentially, I would say, kidnapped the Larry Charlton, who at the time was the sports editor of the Charlotte Observer, takes him out to where Sassone is, and Sassone tells him all these stories about what he's going to do for Charlotte and everything else like that. Then a day later, Bill Ballinger, I think Bill's still alive, who wrote for the Charlotte News, comes back and writes a story about going on a plane with this Paul Sassone, who was brandishing guns with his pilot and flying up to Toronto to try and talk to John Bassett, and just a kind of a bizarre thing. He comes back to the Charlotte airport, and when he gets off, he's arrested by the police, by marshals. And again, make a long story short, it's he's a fugitive that stole a plane in Memphis. He was in the witness protection program, comes to Charlotte and masks himself as somebody that's going to save the team. Of course, he said that he would have the $2 million, I think, by Monday. And, of course, that $2 million never went in. Again, so they go back and they find out his story. He's back in Memphis in jail. And as it turns out, he was put in the witness protection program because his real name was Paul Sassone from New York. He tried to commit suicide off the Verrazano Bridge, and they talked him down off the bridge, and put him in the witness protection program. And there he was in Charlotte. Somehow he stole a plane and came or in Memphis, and came into Charlotte and fooled everybody for 3 days. How do you like that for a story?
This is the league that keeps on giving, right? These stories, I mean, you could not write these and be taken seriously, and yet these were actually things that happened.
Read my book.
No, and I encourage our audience to do that, because it's just, I mean, your experiences are but a microcosm of this crazy league. All right, so how does it end? And I think it's actually quite touching and or ironic and or pick your adjective about how the team, and then a couple of days later the actual league itself, sort of whimpers to an end. Maybe you want to set the scene as to the place where your final game actually winds up happening.
Well,
that's ironic.
I think in life we keep returning to things without realizing them. I think of Franklin Field, and it was the place that my father got the Eagles into when they could have gone under. This was when he was commissioner. It's the place where he died. It's the place where we, on a rainy, hot night in Philadelphia, where we played our final game against the Philadelphia Bell, I had invited my mother to go to the game, and she had not been there, I think, in 30 or 40 years. And nobody showed up to the games. That sound familiar? Played in a rainstorm with actually the place being run by the unions that had something going against the University of Pennsylvania. So the game ends, and we go back to Charlotte, and 2 days later, actually Howard Cosell broke the story that the owners, I was one of the few that voted not to close, but the other owners in the league decided they didn't want to spend any more money, and so the league closed down. And that was it. That the whole situation closed down, and maybe again there were so many maybes. Maybe it would have worked, but actually, a month later, my mother climbed the stairs because there are no elevators, still aren't at Franklin Field, and she got sick. When she came home, she was dead a month later. Died on Thanksgiving Day. So the team died, she died, my father died there, and that's the way it ended. And ironically, the next day, after we announced the end of the league, I called Dan Rooney at the Steelers, and I said, Dan, I just want to tell you that you're the head of the expansion franchise. This city deserves a franchise. I said, they're going to be a great city. And he said, you know what? Thank you. He said, I'll let the committee know what you have to say, blah, 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 blah. And, of course, they eventually came in. Jerry Richardson, back to the ironies of life. First year I go to the Colts, 1960, and Jerry Richardson has decided after they won the championship in 59 to take his bonus money and retire. He was Raymond Berry's backup. Went to North Carolina, South Carolina, founded the Hardee's Hamburger Place, and he's the guy that got the franchise instead of me.
Well, apparently it's available again, so maybe now's your last chance.
Well, as I say at the end of that chapter, I quote the famous end of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, and basically talking about the old man after he and kind of a look at my life in Charlotte in football. I wasn't able to get the Eagles back, tried to buy them back in the middle of the 60s. Then tried with Charlotte, and of course, the great story is that the old man went out, caught the biggest fish of his life, tied it to the side of his ship. This was the greatest victory of his life. And on the way back, the sharks kept eating away, and by the time he got to port, there was nothing left but the bones of the fish. And he went back that night and had his cup of coffee and went to bed and dreamed of someday having to catch that fish again. And I basically said, my fishing is over. I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to be able to go out and get another Fisher or franchise. I have to realize that Charlotte's the end of my life in football. And it was.
But it did open up the door, though, to a quite successful and still going broadcast career. And a very interesting sort of renaissance for you, no?
No, it was, because the thing now, and the thing I've been able to do, well, two things. I stayed in sports till about full-time in radio and television until about 15 years ago, and decided then I wanted to go the other way and do straight talk and talk to authors and famous people all over the world, and that's been another renaissance. But the thing I've been able to do is, when you're in the inside of football, as all of these ex-GMs and players, when they go to ESPN and all these places, they find out that the things that they knew when they played and coached are completely different when you get outside of it and look at it. So I was even able better to judge. I can judge a player, I've always been able to, but I could judge a player better today by being away from it and looking at it in a different way than I could then. So there's always, if you're willing to look, something else there, but still, again, it's been an incredible ride. I've done practically everything I want to do in my life, and understanding if you live long enough, there are going to be a hell of a lot of disappointments too.
All right, I got two final questions for you. One small, short one, and one sort of landscape looking forward. The short one is this. A part of your broadcasting career included a year as the color commentator for the USFL Boston Breakers, the first year of that team, which peripatetically then went to New Orleans and then went to Portland, and that's a whole story in and of itself. Someday we'll get into that. Having been part of the USFL, at least in that regard, why do you think the USFL didn't look at Charlotte based on your experiences and/or recommendation to the NFL folks of that as a market? You
know what? It's funny because one of the owners was Randy Vataha, who I signed as a free agent my first year with the Patriots. And he was with a group, George Matthews was the principal owner, who's a multimillionaire from around here at Northeastern. But you know what? I had said to them, I don't know why you're going to New Orleans. You should go to Charlotte. But I'm trying to think. Charlotte had not come in yet. But never underestimate sometimes the stupidity of people when something's right in front of them. Because I think, again, luckily for the NFL, they didn't go in there, that they went someplace else. But again, if you have to get, if I thought the USFL really had a real chance to make it. They had some, think of Jim Kelly, think of all the good players that came out of that league.
Oh, yeah.
But again, if you don't have really strong ownership, it's easy to get the NFL today because of all the money you get. But in any league you start, if you want to make it, you have to get people like the people that Lamar Hunt got, the people like Bert Bell and Art Rooney and George Hallis that had a dream and were willing to back it up with their money. What happens to these Johnny-come-latelys in a lot of these leagues, they get in, they think it's really great, and then they start losing money, and they're not willing to hang on. Hunt and his owners were willing to hang on. Bert Bell and their owners were willing to hang on. That's why they made it. And that's probably too late for any league to make it now, because the NFL of 32 teams, 16 of them to me are like expansion teams. My God, they're the quality of football. Luckily for the TV and there are enough great players on at least 16 teams. But there are teams today that I would say are playing in the NFL are not as good as the USFL. Absolutely. And probably not as good as some of the teams in the old AFL. They're just, you can't be. You've got 32 teams. There's not enough players. There might be 8 or 10 really good quarterbacks, and there might be another 16 or so that are not good at all.
Well, that's my last question is sort of, what do you think the future of the NFL is and looks like? I mean, you mentioned the term storm clouds earlier. You can't not be a fan of pro football and not sort of see some of the cracks, I guess, perhaps in the shield that is the NFL, whether it's CTE or the treatment of players and their grievances. Frankly, just how communities are in many respects being held hostage by teams, and their demands for upgrading stadiums and all those kinds of things. It seems to me that there are a bunch of things that could easily trip up a very successful, arguably the most successful sports league in this country, if not careful and or wise.
What's the famous line from the movie Wall Street? Greed is good. Greed is good. And I think what's happened here, first of all, do you know any dynasty, any great business that doesn't eventually come back to earth? I mean, it has to happen. It might take longer, but it's the thinking and the way you act that brings it back to earth. So I look at CTE is certainly one of them. But I think the greatest danger to the league is that the overexposure, because you're educating people, but you can't educate people to the point of them saying, wait a minute, I'm not that dumb, that product stinks. When you're trying to show every team, now you have the red zone. I turn the red zone on Sunday, and a lot of times I say, I'll watch the Patriots game, but I don't need to watch all these other games. I can get the best plays on red zone. So you're taking and telling people the 32 teams are quality products? Come on. I mean, if you're on Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, Monday night, Thursday night, and then when you get into December, Saturday, you mean to tell me that the public is not going to see that this product isn't that good? Parts of it? I think that's the greatest danger to the league itself. And they're not going back because they keep saying the money is really good. But the other thing is that there's such inequality. The Players Association, it's the only league, as strong as it is, where the Players Association really basically has no power. Baseball has it. Hockey now has it. Basketball certainly has it. The NFL player is still grossly underpaid for what he does. His life is very short, 3 to 3.5 years, and yet much of the time their player association just doesn't have the power and never really has. So there's a lot of inequality there. Now, whether it'll take 10, 15, 20 years, I have no idea. But I think the other thing that you have to look at is this generation, people 20 to 40 years old, let's say, they're on their phones, they're on their computers, they're not really fans of the game. They play fantasy football, but they're not doing it because they think so-and-so is better than so-and-so. It'll eventually, by the way, be gambling. It is gambling. So are you creating fans or are you creating people that are just keeping score? all of that. And the NFL is smart in that they're selling rights now to being able to watch a game on your computer and get it on your phone and everything else like that. But I think the days of people sitting down and watching a doubleheader in the millions, I think those days are over.
Yeah,
I hope not.
Yeah,
I hope.
Yeah,
but I think it is.
Yeah, and my professional day job is in the media industry, and clearly, you look at television viewing. You mentioned millennials. There are, the viewing habits are just saturation, all those things, and the way people watch television, right? Cutting cable cords and streaming and not necessarily being exposed to advertising. I mean, look, the one thing though the NFL has going for it, but for how long is a question, is its dominance as a live and hard to record or skip or not see live a product. And it's very interesting to see how intertwined network television and the NFL are these days. And all the cracks in the television part are already starting to happen. And if the NFL is not careful, it in some respects could wind up being a very, mutually unbeneficial relationship. They might go down together. Clearly, if you're not paying attention, some of those pieces are starting to crack, and it'll be interesting to sort of see how it plays out.
Well, let me pose this to you and your audience. The craziness of it. Peyton Manning, $10 million by Fox or ESPN? Do you think that Peyton Manning or Jesus Christ himself could draw one more viewer if the game's no good? It's a joke. It is absolutely, hey, good for Manning if he can do it. But what I'm saying is, you can talk about every new star on, whether it was John Madden to start out that kind of changed the color commentator's role, all the way through. But you tell me if you've got two stiff teams playing each other, that Peyton Manning or Tom Brady or anybody else that you put out there is going to make a difference. And yet that's the craziness of just what you're talking about. That television, you talk to people on television, they think there's never going to be the end of anything. And I understand how they feel in football. And I certainly like the game. There's a lot of fault that I find with it. But the other thing that I really find, whether you're on your computer, your cell phone, or you're just watching TV, the games are entirely too long. And the breaks for commercials, and they're trying everything. And please, God, take me back to the time when there was no replay. Please take me back to the time when a catch was a catch. This has gotten ridiculous. Even 90% of the time, most of the calls are right. But that's true in any sport. Do we have to take it to the point of where we go through this agony on every play, every touchdown's repeated? What you say to yourself, I'm not going to sit here for this. I think that's another element.
That's very interesting and well said, right? And coming from somebody like yourself who's literally and figuratively lived a life in football, those are important thoughts. And you wonder how the sport of professional football looks going forward. I'm sure you will be paying keen attention in the years to come. And I can't thank you enough. This has been fun. This has been a great conversation, and I look forward to sharing this with our growing and very passionate audience. One last opportunity here. Why don't you do a little song and dance here for the book? Describe where we can get it and all that kind of good stuff.
Well, first and foremost, I think it's the most definitive a book on the history of pro football, but also the country. It's called Present at the Creation, My Life in the NFL and How It Became a Behemoth. But basically, it's also a story, it's a personal story of somebody that's seen every era from the 30s to today and can really take the reader through what it really is, including many of the people in it that weren't even around football, as my mother My mother had an incredible career, but added to the NFL. All of the characters that go through this book, you'll never hear of again. And so, therefore, you can get it on the cheapest way to do it. That's in bookstores all over the country, and you can get it on audio now too. But the cheapest way, the best way, is just go on Amazon. There are great reviews on it on Amazon, and you can get it at a really reasonable price. But I guarantee you this: you'll take a trip like you've never taken through the game if you read this book.
Oh, I can vouch for that. I've read significant portions of it already. It's published by University of Nebraska Press, who we thank tremendously for connecting us to Upton. It's been a great conversation. Rosemary Sikora, in particular, the publicity manager there. Thank you. And I look forward to hopefully staying in touch. And I'll let you know when we get this episode up and running, hopefully in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I can't thank you enough. This has been absolutely tremendous. I appreciate the time, and I know our audience will and does too.
Just remember, on any given Sunday, that's what Bert Bell said, anybody can beat anybody else.
All right. Thank you to our new friend, Upton Bell. Very fun conversation. I learned a tremendous amount, and what a unique individual. I mean, having been literally as a kid in the earliest days of the NFL at the knee of his dad, the second ever commissioner of the National Football League. What an amazing opportunity and fun time that must have been to sort of be sort of a kid literally in a candy store of professional football and being able to see and hear and play with and hear the stories of these great players and frankly, kind of witnessing the sort of congealing, if you will, of the National Football League and setting the tone and the foundation for the machinery and the giganticness of what the NFL is today. Look, the stories of the Colts, which were certainly a powerhouse franchise in the 60s, the Patriots, of course, and the interesting, craziness of the World Football League. And Upton Bell was in the midst of all of it. And as we've heard in our couple of previous episodes on the WFL, again, all part of the big tableau, tapestry, quilt work, if you will, of professional football in this country. And Upton Bell certainly is a unique and amazing football life, and we were honored to have a chat with him, and we thank him for doing so. Now, as I promised, if you would like to win a copy of Upton Bell's book, Present at the Creation, My Life in the NFL and the Rise of America's Game, we're going to make it really simple. If all you got to do is send an email to hello@goodseatsstillavailable, make sure you spell that correctly, hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And all I want is your name, your age, where you listen or are listening from, how you listen to the show. Do you download it? Do you stream it? Do you, what service do you use? What, are you an Android or Apple, whatever? And maybe a little bit of a hint of the sports or the teams or the leagues that are most interesting to you that you'd like to hear more of. The first 5 people that send me an email with that stuff to hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com will win a free copy of the book. I'll respond. I'll send you an email, and then I can get your address and your contact information. You don't need to send that to me now, but just send me your name, your age, where you're listening from, how you listen to the show, and then give me some idea of the sports, the teams, the leagues, things that interest you in our little genre here, our little journey of forgotten sports here on Good Seats Still Available. So we thank our friend Rosemary Sikora, who is the publicity manager at the University of Nebraska Press, which of course is the imprint upon which, or in which, or from which, I don't even say that. They are the publishers, there you go, of Present at the Creation, Upton Bell's book. A great read. If you don't win a copy, go out and buy one, and please do so. If you're going to do that, go to our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search for episode number, 56? And you'll find a link to not only the show, some imagery about this episode, but also the links there that you can literally buy the book from Amazon. And of course, By doing so, you give us a few little pennies, and that helps support our show. And if no better way to support the show than to buy all the books and stuff you hear about through our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Socially, we like to be social, and apparently more and more of you do too. So find us on Twitter at Good Seats Still. You'll find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. And yes, there is a Facebook page devoted to us as well. You can find us there and send us notes or whatever you'd like there as well. Last but not least, our friends at Podfly Productions, who put this show together, in particular, the great Jerry Payne, the good doctor. And if you want to learn about podcasting and a little bit about what their services are, how they help you get going out of nowhere, or frankly, if you're a pro and you just want some expert editing and production help, Podfly Productions is the place to go. Tell them I sent you. And of course, you can find them at podfly.net. Okay, we're done for this week. Thanks so much for listening. We will see you next week. No, we won't. We'll hear you. We'll talk to you. You will listen to us, hopefully, next week. Whatever. We look forward to it. And thank you again, as always, for listening. Till then, take care, everybody.